Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let us take the next chapter about the description of Yawm al-Qiyamah. May Allah protect us from its terrors. We'll take hadith number 2864 from Miqdad ibn al-Aswad radiyallahu anhu, who says that he heard the Prophet ﷺ say, Tudna ash-shamsu yawm al-qiyamati min al-khalq hatta takuna minhum ka-miqdari mil. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, the sun will draw close to the people until it will be 1 mil distance from them. One of the narrators, Sulaim, says, I do not know what he meant by a mil. Is it a distance of land? Or is it the stick which one uses to put on the kuhl? Anyway, the Prophet goes on, فَيَكُونُ النَّاسِ عَلَى قَدْرِ أَعْمَالِهِمْ مِنَ الْعَرَقِ. The people will be drenched in sweat in accordance with their deeds. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَكُونُ إِلَى كَعْبَيْ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَكُونُ إِلَى رُكْبَتَيْ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَكُونُ إِلَى حَقْوَيْ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يُلْجِمُهُ الْعَرَقُ إِلْجَامًا. وَأَشَارَ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بيده إلى فيه. So for some of them the sweat will reach up to their ankle bones, for some of them it will reach up to their knees, and for others it will reach up to their waists, and for others it will reach up to their mouths such that it will gag them. And the Prophet indicated with this using his hand, pointing to his mouth. First of all, the mil, they say it is in modern day units 1848. That's 1848 meters, which is incredibly close for the sun. In this world we would not be able to bear it, but of course there is no analogy between this world and the hereafter. As for the sweat, then the least evil people would have the least amount of sweat, and the more evil would have more sweat, and so on. Of course we know that there will be some who will be shaded on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and they will not sweat at all. We ask Allah to make us from them. And this narration is similar to the narration which has preceded, which talks about the fire reaching up to the ankle bones for some, reaching up to the waist for others, and reaching up to the necks for others. So we find people are of grades. The people are not treated equally on Yawm al-Qiyamah. It all depends on your deeds. The point of mentioning this narration is to give us a wake-up call and a reality check so that we may work righteousness to save ourselves before it is too late. Let us take the next chapter about the qualities and descriptions with which the people of Jannah and the denizens of Jahannam can be recognized. This is a lengthier narration, 2865. Let's take the translation of it. From Iyad ibn Himar, he says the Prophet was delivering a sermon, a khutbah, and he said, Behold, my Lord has commanded me that I should teach you which you do not know, and that which he has taught me today. All the wealth which I have conferred to my servants is halal for them, and I have created my servants as hunafa, inclining to tawheed and away from shirk and kufr. However, what happens is that the shayateen come to them and they turn them away from their deen and make haram for them what I have made halal. And these shayateen order the people to commit shirk, about which I have not sent down any permission. And indeed Allah looked down upon the people of the earth and He hated them, whether it was the Arabs or the non-Arabs, except for the remnants of the people of the book. And Allah goes on to say, I have sent the Prophet in order to examine you and those amongst you, and I have sent the book to you, O Muhammad, which cannot be washed away with water, so that you may recite it whilst alert or in sleep. The Prophet says, and indeed Allah has commanded me to burn the Quraysh, meaning do away with them. The Prophet said, I said to Allah, O my Rabb, they would break my head like the tearing of a bread. And Allah replied, you will turn them out as they turned you out, and fight against them, and we will help you in this. You should spend and you will be conferred upon. You send an army, and I would send an army 5 times greater than that. Fight against those who disobey you along with those who obey you. The inmates of Jannah are 3 types. The one who wields authority and is just and fair, the one who is truthful and has been endowed with the power to do good, and the one who is merciful and kind-hearted towards his relatives and to every righteous Muslim, and the one who does not beg of other people even if he has a large family to support. And the denizens of the fire are 5. Number 1, the weak who lacks power to avoid evil. The second is the one who pursues everything and does not care about whether it is halal or haram, and has no care for their family or for their wealth. Number 3, the treacherous one, whose treachery cannot be concealed even in minor affairs. And number 4, the one who betrays you or dupes you morning and evening in regard to your family and your property. And as for the 5th one, the Prophet mentioned a miser or a liar, and those who are in the habit of abusing people and using foul language. In another riwayah of this hadith, there is an addition, إِنَّ اللَّهَ أَوْحَى إِلَيَّ أَن تَوَاضَعُوا حَتَّى لَا يَفْخَرَ أَحَدٌ عَلَى أَحَدٍ وَلَا يَبْغِي أَحَدٌ عَلَى أَحَدٍ. Allah has revealed to me that you should be humble towards each other, such that no one boasts over the other, and no one transgresses against the rights of the other. We take from the narration that the Prophet is eager to teach people what they do not know, and that he does not hide knowledge. We find that every person who is born as a Hanif inclining to Tawheed. So no child is born as a mushrik or as an atheist. Impossible. Rather, this is the effects of the shaitan. Likewise, you find nowadays people saying that homosexuality is natural. This is nonsense. No child is born as a sodomite. Rather, these are the whispers of shaitan that people cave into. And we also notice that shaitan make haram what Allah has made halal. An example of this is given in Surah Al-An'am. Bahira, Sa'iba, Wasila, and Ham. These are 4 types of camels which the mushrikun would declare to be haram, to be slaughtered, for various made-up reasons, and Allah Jalla wa Ala did not declare such animals to be haram. As for when he says that the Quran cannot be washed away with water, what he means here is that the Quran is remembered in the hearts of people and it cannot be washed away with water. If you write down the Quran on paper, then yes, it can be washed away. But how do you wash away that which is memorized in the heart? However, the Quran is preserved using both methods, and this is the best way of preserving any document. We also learn the importance of being humble to each other, and that pride is an inspiration of shaitan, so we must fight it. Only Allah Jalla wa Ala is allowed to be proud, no one else. However, as for the kuffar, then you do not need to be humble to them except those who have a contract with the Muslimin. So you're not allowed to transgress against them. Let us take the next chapter about how the dead will be shown his seat in either Jannah or Jahannam, and also the torment of the qabr. Let's take Hadith 2866, Riwayah 1, from Ibn Umar, that the Prophet said, إِذَا مَاتَ الرَّجُلُ عُرِضَ عَلَيْهِ مَقْعَدُهُ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ إِنْ كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ فَالْجَنَّةِ وإن كان من أهل النار فالنار ثم يقال هذا مقعدك الذي تبعث إليه يوم القيامة. When a man dies, he will be shown his place by morning and evening. If he is a person of Jannah, he will be shown his seat in Jannah. If he is a person of fire, he will be shown his place in the fire, and it will be said, this is your place, to which you will be resurrected on Yawm al-Qiyamah. We take from the narration the pleasure or pain of Yawm al-Qiyamah, because just looking at your seat will cause either pleasure or pain. It is similar to how Allah Jalla wa Ala talks about Fir'aun, النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. So by morning and evening they will be tormented with the fire, and that's before Yawm al-Qiyamah. Actually, the punishment of the grave does not start at the grave. For the kafir, it starts at the time when their soul is taken. In Surah Al-Anfal, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذْ يَتَوَفَّى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْمَلَائِكَةَ يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُمْ وَأَدْبَارَهُمْ وَذُوقُوا عَذَابَ الْحَرِيقِ. If only you can see the malaika taking the souls of the kuffar, striking their faces and their backs, and taste you the punishment of the fire. And there are many other such evidence as well, about the malaika striking and tormenting the evildoer as they take his soul. We could also take that Jannah and Jahannam are already created, that's why he's being shown them. Although perhaps it's not a direct evidence, it is an indirect evidence, at least. However, there is plenty of evidence which is direct, such as Adam and Hawa living in Jannah, such as the hadith which has preceded about Jannah and Jahannam arguing with each other, and about how Allah sending Jibreel to look at Jannah and then surrounding it with hardship, and then sending him to Jahannam and then surrounding it with shahawat, desires. Also, this address, to whom is it being made? It cannot be the body because that has been disintegrated. So it is the soul which is in the grave and which is experiencing either pleasure or pain. We also have other authentic narrations which say that the person of Jannah will be shown his place in the fire, and it will be said to him that it has been replaced with a seat in Jannah, and vice versa for the kafir. And this will increase the person of Jannah in his joy when he realizes he's been saved from the fire, and it will increase the kafir in his sorrow and grief when he realizes he could have been in Jannah so easily. Also, it needs to be noted that the souls of the shuhada are in green birds roaming around in Jannah. They are not in the grave. So they receive something much, much better than merely being shown their seat in Jannah. Okay, let's take Hadith 2868 from Anas. The Prophet said, لولا أن لا تدافنوا لدعوت الله أن يسمعكم من عذاب القبر. If it weren't for the fact that you would stop burying the deceased, I would make dua to Allah to make you hear from the punishment of the grave. So we take from this narration the clear-cut evidence that the grave has a punishment. Not only that, but it potentially could be heard, and it is horrific. Let's move to Hadith 2869 from Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiallahu anhu. He says, we were sitting with the Prophet after the sun had set, and we heard a sound, to which the Prophet said, Yahud tu'adhabu fi quburiha. These are the Jews being punished in their graves. Again, further evidence of the punishment of the grave. Let's take a look at Hadith 2870, Riwayah 1, from Anas ibn Malik, that the Prophet said, إِنَّ الْمَيِّتِ إِذَا وُضِعَ فِي قَبْرِهِ إِنَّهُ لَيَسْمَعُ خَفْقَ نِعَالِهِمْ إِذَا انصَرَفُوا. When the deceased is put in his grave, he hears the sound of the shoes of his relatives as they walk away. The question which comes from this narration is that, can the deceased hear us? Some said yes, they can, because of this narration, and also because of other narrations like the Prophet speaking to the dead mushrikeen at Badr, and he told Umar that they can hear you, except that they cannot respond. Other scholars said that these are specific scenarios, but the general rule is that the deceased cannot hear anything of this world. Yes, there are exceptions, but we're talking generally they cannot hear, because Allah Jalla wa Ala says, إِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. You cannot make the dead to hear. Likewise, he says, وَلَا تُسْمِعُ مَنْ فِي الْقُبُورِ. You cannot make the people in the grave hear you. Now these ayat admittedly are referring to the kuffar, as they are spiritually dead, and you cannot make those people hear the message when their hearts are sealed. However, it is making an analogy between the kuffar and the deceased who are physically deceased. So just like you cannot make the physically deceased hear, so you cannot make the kuffar hear. Now if this analogy is correct, then it means you cannot make the deceased hear you. That is to say, physically deceased. And so these types of ayat refer to both the physically deceased and the kuffar. And this appears to be a sound argument. Let us take Hadith 2871 from Al-Bara ibn Azib. The Prophet recited, يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ. Allah will keep firm with the firm word those who believe in this world and in the hereafter. And in relation to that, the Prophet said, نَزَلَتْ فِي عَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ. It was revealed in connection to the punishment of the grave. فَيُقَالُ لَهُ مَنْ رَبُّكَ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّيَ اللَّهُ وَالنَّبِيِّ مُحَمَّدْ صلى الله عليه وسلم. فذلك قوله عز وجل يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة. When he will be questioned, who is your Rabb? And he will say, my Rabb is Allah, and that my Prophet is Muhammad ﷺ. So you see here, he will be kept with the firm word as he answers the questions in the grave. This narration is about the questions that the deceased will be asked. Who is your Rabb? What is your deen? And who is your messenger? And in the Sunan, a fourth question, how did you know of all of this? And he will say, I read it in the Quran. So again, what is being addressed here is the soul, not the body. And no help can be given to the deceased from the living, meaning they cannot give him the answers, because if the deceased could hear, then he should be able to hear the answers from the living. And this would support the opinion which says that the deceased cannot hear the living, except in certain circumstances for which we have evidence, such as the noise of the shoes. The narrations teach us that 2 angels will sit him up. They are said to be called Munkar and Nakir. They are even given a description of being blue and black color in the Sunan. But the interesting question here, will all the nations be questioned in such a way? Well, this is entirely possible. There is a difference of opinion on the matter. The first 2 questions will be the same for every nation. As for the third question about the Prophet, then this would depend on their Prophet, and this is entirely possible. But it's just that we cannot be absolutely sure about this, because we do not have any direct evidence. But it's entirely possible. As for the punishment of the grave, then we have already said that Fir'aun and his people will be punished in the grave. And so the punishment and pleasure of the grave, we can say, applies to all the nations, because everyone was either a Muslim or a Kafir. And everybody will either enter Jannah or Jahannam, and will enter the Barzakh before that. Let's take Hadith 2872 from Abu Hurairah. We'll go into the translation. And it is Abu Hurairah's statement when he says that the soul of a believer goes out of the body and is received by 2 angels who would take it to the sky. Hamad, one of the narrators, mentions the sweetness of the odor, of the fragrance of this soul. And the dwellers of the sky say, "Here comes a righteous soul from the earth. Let there be blessings of Allah upon him, in which it resides." And it is carried by the angels to the Rabb Azza wa Jal, who will say to them, "Take it to its destined end." As for the Kafir, the soul leaves the body, and there is a foul stench from its being cursed. And the dwellers of the sky say, "There comes an impure soul from earth." And likewise Allah Jalla wa Ala will say, "Take this soul to its destined end." Abu Hurairah says that the Prophet put a thin cloth on his nose while mentioning the foul smell of the Kafir. Now actually there is a fuller version of this hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, where the Prophet speaks about what happens when the soul is taken out, both for the Kafir and the Muslim, and we would refer the listener to read that narration in full. But we take from this narration the honor that the mu'min receives and the dishonor which the Kafir receives after death, and all of this before Jannah and Jahannam. Let's take Hadith 2873. Anas ibn Malik reports, "We were with Umar radiallahu anhu between Mecca and Medina, and we began to look for the hilal, the new moon. I was a sharp-eyed man," he says, "so I could see it, but no one else claimed that they saw it. I told Umar, 'Do you not see it?' But Umar could not see it, and Umar replied, 'I will soon be able to see it,' meaning to say when it shines more brightly." Anas says, "I was laying on the bed, and Umar began to mention the people of Badr to us. He says that the Prophet ﷺ showed us one day the actual place of death of the people participating in Badr from the Mushrikeen, and he would tell us, 'This is the place of the death of so-and-so tomorrow, if Allah wills.' Umar says, 'By him who sent him with the truth, they,' meaning the kuffar, 'did not miss the places of their death which the Prophet pointed out for them. After the battle they were thrown into the well, one after the other, and the Prophet called out to them and said, "O so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, have you found what Allah and His Messenger had promised you to be true?" "I have found what Allah had promised me to be the truth." Umar replied, "O Messenger of Allah, are you talking with bodies without soul in them?" Thereupon the Prophet replied, "Ma antum bi asma'a lima aqulu minhum, غير أنهم لا يستطيعون أن يردوا علي شيئا." You cannot hear me any better than they can, except that they are unable to reply anything to me. We take from this narration the miracle of the Prophet in that he was given the revelation and he knew what was going to happen in the future. And this only happens when Allah Jalla wa Ala lets him in on it. Otherwise the Prophet has no way of knowing what will happen in the future. We find that matters are already in the knowledge of Allah Jalla wa Ala. He knows what will happen in the future. He knows exactly what will take place in the future, all the details. We have already discussed the matter of whether the deceased can hear the living. In another narration, We know the names which he calls out. O Abu Jahl ibn Hisham, O Umayyah ibn Khalaf, O Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, O Shaybah ibn Rabi'ah. And these were the chiefs of the Quraysh at that time. Let's take the next chapter about the reckoning. Hadith 2876, Aisha reports that the Prophet said, من حوسب يوم القيامة عذب فقلت أليس قد قال الله عز وجل فسوف يحاسب حسابا يسيرا فقال ليس ذاك الحساب إنما ذاك العرض من نوقش الحساب يوم القيامة عذب. The Prophet said, whoever is taken to account on Yawm al-Qiyamah is tormented. Aisha says, but does Allah not say that he will receive an easy reckoning? This is in the Quran. The Prophet said, this is not the reckoning, rather this is just when your deeds are presented to you. As for the one who is interrogated about his deeds on Yawm al-Qiyamah is in fact being punished. We learn from this narration that being interrogated about your deeds on Yawm al-Qiyamah is in itself a punishment before Jahannam. As for what the Quran states about an easy reckoning, then this is simply that your deeds are presented to you and you acknowledge that yes, you performed these deeds. And then Allah Jalla wa Ala will forgive you for your evil deeds. He will not interrogate you about them. And this is the easy reckoning. But what the Prophet is speaking about in this narration is the interrogation. Just like police or perhaps intelligence officers may interrogate a suspect, except that none knows the interrogation of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Put it this way, if you look at all of your righteous actions, put them all together, do they equal the ni'mah of eyesight? The answer will be no. And even if we suppose the answer is yes, then how will you equal all the other innumerable blessings that Allah Jalla wa Ala has given you? وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. So if Allah Jalla wa Ala wanted to make a deep dive into your actions and test you if you've balanced the scales, then you will be in trouble and embarrassment. Also, from this narration we can take that even the Sahaba would ask the Prophet questions about something which was unclear to them, just as Aisha did here. Just as indeed Umar in the previous narration asked the Prophet how you could possibly be speaking to dead people. So ask about matters which are unclear to you, as long as the question is of practical benefit. Let's take a look at the next chapter about thinking well of Allah Jalla wa Ala at the time of death. Jabir reports that the Prophet said, لا يموتن أحدكم إلا وهو يحسن بالله الظن. None of you should die except he is thinking goodly of Allah Jalla wa Ala. We have taken the hadith where Allah Jalla wa Ala says, I am as my servant thinks of me. So if you think positively of Allah Jalla wa Ala, He will treat you with positivity, and vice versa. So therefore at the time of death you want Jannah, you want forgiveness, and that's exactly what you want to be thinking of Allah Jalla wa Ala. In fact, in another narration we have that you also should be fearing for your evil deeds, because if that's the case, then the one who fears his evil deeds, the effects of his evil deeds will inshallah be saved by Allah Jalla wa Ala. And this is the reward of righteous fear. And let's take the last hadith of this chapter and book of the description of Jannah and Jahannam. Hadith 2879. Abdullah ibn Umar reports that the Prophet said, إذا أراد الله بقوم عذابا أصاب العذاب من كان فيهم ثم بعثوا على أعمالهم. When Allah intends to chastise a people, He chastises all of them, and then they will be resurrected according to their deeds. This narration means to tell us that if Allah Jalla wa Ala sends down a punishment to destroy a people because of their evil, and if you are amongst them and you are a righteous person, you too will be destroyed. But it's just that on Yawm al-Qiyamah you will be resurrected in accordance with your righteous deeds, and they will be resurrected in accordance with their evil deeds. So you will not be together in the Akhirah, but you will be together in this dunya as you are all punished. And so in this then there is a warning of living amongst the people of evil. Stay away from them. And if you do happen to be amongst them, then enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Let's take some review questions. Question number 1. Describe how people will sweat on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Question number 2. Discuss whether the dead can hear the living. Give both opinions, and the opinion which is weightier. Question number 3. There are 2 types of accounting, easy and difficult. Explain what each is. that is to say how it manifests.